Welcome. You found Why We Are Christians. My name is Kent Philpott, and we are going to be talking today with one of my old friends. We've known each other for a long time, Ray.
That we have.
And this is Ray Schneider. Schneider.
Yes.
Is that, what kind of a name is that?
German.
German.
German means tailor.
It means what?
Tailor.
Tailor?
You know, somebody that sews.
Somebody that sewed stuff?
Yep.
So you had tailors in your background.
Tailors
someplace.
in my background, yep.
All right, Ray. Okay, very good. So let's talk about where were you born?
I was born and raised in northern Indiana.
Northern Indiana.
Yeah, pretty close to Lake Michigan. And I was there, for 10 years. When I was 10 years old, my dad worked for Union Carbide, and they wanted to open a new plant in Texas City, Texas, on the Gulf Coast, just across from Galveston. So we moved when I was 10 years old, down to Texas City. And I went to junior high and high school.
That must have been a shock to move from Indiana to Texas, Galveston area, Texas.
Yes, right from the brick area in Indiana to a brand new town. Well, it wasn't a brand new town. The industry was brand new. The town was older, but they had 5 miles of petrochemical plants. And
Okay.
Union Carbide was a chemical company. So we moved there.
Okay, now brothers and sisters?
I've got 2 brothers.
Two?
I'm the oldest, and I've got 2 brothers, obviously, that are younger than I am.
Okay. They still living?
Yes.
All of them?
Yes, both of them.
Both of them?
Yep, my middle brother lives in Venice, Florida, which is on the Gulf Coast of Florida. And my youngest brother lives in Los Angeles.
Los Angeles, okay. Where in L.A., do you know?
Buena Park.
Buena Park, okay. Okay, so family of origin. Talk a little bit about your parents.
Uncle Frederick, they lived in German. They lived in Prussia, and this has been in the middle 1800s. And Uncle Frederick's brothers, and every male at 18 had to go into the Prussian army. And when Uncle Frederick was 17, his brothers bought him a ticket and sent him to the United States. And so he wound up, in Connecticut. And so both sides of my parents, my father's side was German, but my mother's side also were in Connecticut. So all of our family, was in Connecticut, and still a number of them lived there. When my dad, was the first member of either of the family that moved out of Connecticut. And when he went to work in Indiana, that's why he was born in Indiana, because Union Carbide, hired him in 1934 in the midst of the Depression, and moved to Indiana, and he was the first one to move out. And all the rest of them on my mom's side and most of my dad's side now are still in Connecticut. I had a lot of cousins. No more uncles and aunts.
No more uncles and
No
aunts.
more uncles. They're gone. They are gone, just like my parents.
Okay.
But a lot of cousins, still in Connecticut.
Okay, now, did they have a religious faith? Did they go to church at all?
No.
Nothing?
No, nothing. No, it was not until we moved to Texas that my mom, started bringing the 3 boys, myself and my 2 brothers, to church. My dad did not go to church, but my mom did, and I'm not really sure how come, and I don't remember that. Well, of course, we never lived in Connecticut. We lived in Indiana, but I don't remember my mom bringing me my brothers and me to church in Indiana. I only remember that in Texas.
Okay.
And so in Texas City, we went to a Presbyterian, first Presbyterian church.
First Presbyterian church.
And and my dad, was not a churchgoer, but my mom was. And when I graduated from high school and went to college, I didn't go back to church either. But as long as my mom insisted, that I go with her, then I would go with my mom to church. But once I got out of the house,
That was it.
That was all. That was
That was
it.
it. Okay, Ray, when you were in high school, did you do any sports?
No, I was in the band.
You were in a band?
I played the clarinet.
Clarinet.
Right. And kind of interesting, there were 3 rows of clarinetists. I was in the second row, and one of the replacement, the original, the band director was called into the Army, and the guy that replaced him was going to put me back from the second row into the third row.
What?
And Sue Watson, sitting next to me, spoke up. Here we are in junior high. Spoke up and said, he is a better clarinetist than third row. He belongs in the first row. So that Wade Pogue was the man's name, moved me up to the first row in Connecticut. And when the original, the band, director came back, from the Army, the solo clarinetist, was in the first seat. Well, of course, they graduated every year. And the guy that was right next to me, Robert Hilton, when Dan Hearn, was graduated, Robert Hilton was supposed to be clarinetist, first solo clarinetist. He said, I don't want to do that. So that meant I got to be solo clarinet. And so, because I was, I played the clarinet, and I did a pretty good job, at the clarinet. So I became solo clarinet in the band. We were a marching band every Friday night. High school football in Texas.
Oh, yeah.
Every Friday night, we would sit there, get on the bus. Wasn't with the players, but with all the band. We'd go to the game. It was a marching band. Every so often, we would have competition. We went to Enid, Oklahoma. There was Texas City High School band was a fairly good band. We got invited to a competition in Enid, Oklahoma. We also got to play in Mexico City. We took high school buses for weeks down to Mexico City.
Good
So we
grief,
sat there. So we played Texas City High School band, played in Mexico City.
Okay, I got to ask you, do you still play the clarinet?
No, I'm not sure how come I gave that up, but I was in college. I can't answer that. No.
I understand. Okay, what did you study in college?
Psychology.
Psychology. I did too.
I sat there and.
That's what's wrong with us, Ray.
Now
we went to college and studied psychology.
We should not have done it. And when I graduated, that was in 1958, and it was a recession going on. So there were no jobs. There were no jobs for psychologists anyway. So I continued. Went for 2 more years. But one of the things while I'm mentioning that, is that I met Delana in college.
Oh, did you? Now, what college did you go to?
University of Southern California in Los Angeles. USC.
They let you into USC?
I can remember, in the band, at every college football games in the L.A. Coliseum.
L.A. Coliseum, I love it. I've been there many times.
And the card stunts, and so forth. But the band, I would sit there and I quit for the first couple of years. I was in the band, but then I became a member of what was called the Trojan Knights. And we were the guys that had yellow shirts. We were the guys that did the card stunts. At every game, you sat there and they had a director down at the front, and you had a bunch of colored cards. And you would put together, and it would say SC, and it would say, fight on, USC, different sayings and words, that would have those cards.
We would have been in the same place a few times back there, because when I was in high school, I went and ushered at the L.A. Coliseum, SC games, UCLA, all that.
Yep.
And I was an usher. And you would have been in the band, Ray.
I would have been in the band.
You would have been in the band.
But the thing I was thinking about, going back, to Delana, I was a graduating senior. And I lost the presidency of my fraternity because I couldn't make a speech. So I said, I'm going to fix that. So I was graduating. I had an elective. There's the Lord in my life. I had an elective. So I went looking for a speech class. Well, the only speech class that was offered was for freshmen. And I thought to myself, wait a minute. I'm a graduating senior. I'm not going to go into a class with a bunch of plebes. Well, there's the Lord sat there and brought in my life. Well, then why are you looking for a speech class? Well, duh. I wanted to be able to speak better than I did, when I lost the presidency. Well, guess who was in that freshman speech class? Delana Justice was her maiden name. Delana, was there. So that's how the Lord, brought us together. First of all, he moved us to Texas City. Then we moved to California because there again, Union Carbide opened a plant in Torrance. And my dad was one of these brilliant guys, a chemical engineer, was very capable of helping open up a plant. So when Union Carbide opened a new plant in Torrance, Carbide moved my dad and our family out to California. Well, that's the Lord in my life. Because not only that, but I went to USC. And not only that, I wanted to take a freshman speech class because the Lord knew full well that Delana would be at USC and would be at that freshman speech class when she was a freshman.
Okay. So you went to speech class. You graduated from SC. What year?
1958.
1958. I graduated from high school in 59.
Okay.
And so we were in the same area.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't even know it. But so you began to date Delana. Now, I thought, what was your career? What did you do for a living?
Well, I went, when there was no jobs for psychologists, I went back and graduated with an MBA in 1960.
An MBA?
An MBA in 1960, again from USC. And so my career, was in management. To begin with North American Aviation. What was the fighter jet that was so famous? The Super Sabre.
Yeah, the Sabre jet.
The Sabre jet was manufactured by North American. So I went to work for North American, and I was in the labor relations department at that particular time. And what would happen with aerospace industry, when they would get a government contract, they would hire thousands of engineers, and when that contract was over, they would fire them. And that was what I got involved in, sitting there and taking guys that had come in, had families, and worked for several years, and suddenly they were out of a job. I didn't like doing that, so that's when I went in and went to work then for, at that time, Pacific Telephone.
I thought you were a telephone company guy.
That's right.
Pacific Telephone.
Right. So I retired, after 25 years with Pacific Telephone.
Okay. In the management area.
Yes.
You weren't climbing telephone poles.
No. I barely could spell telephone pole, much less climb one.
Okay. Right.
So one other thing too, is that the Lord introduced Delana and me in February of 1958, and He pursued her on my behalf for 4 years.
Now say that again.
The Lord brought Delana and me, introduced us in February of 1958.
Okay.
And we were married in February of 1962. Well, in those 4 years, it was the Lord that pursued Delana on my behalf. I did not. She went to Hawaii. She went to San Jose State. I went into the Army. She went to New York City. Those times when we were, apart from each other, we didn't write. We didn't make any phone calls. It was the Lord that made sure that, for talking purposes, the class was in February of 1958, and she went to Hawaii. There was no contact. The Lord said, not going to have that happen. It was very common for fraternities and sororities to have an exchange dinner. So in October of 1958, remember, I met Delana in February. School was out in June. Well, in October, we had an exchange dinner with Alpha Delta Pi, a sorority. Well, here again, guess who happened to be at that exchange dinner?
Now, Ray, did you say that you were in the Army?
Yes.
Now, what did you do in the Army?
I was in the Army Security Agency, and I was responsible for intercepting Morse code. Apparently the enemy, any enemy that we had at that time, dealt with Morse code, so I learned Morse code. And I was in the Army only for 6 months. When I graduated, in June of 1960, the draft was still in effect. I did not want to spend 4 years in the Army, so I joined the Army Reserves, which meant that you had active duty for 6 months, and then every summer, a 2-week summer camp for 7 years. So I went into the Army. I was in the Army Security Agency, and their headquarters was back in Massachusetts, Fort Devon, Massachusetts. So when I graduated, boot camp at the Fort Ord, but then flew back, to Massachusetts. Boot camp was about 2 months, and I spent the next 4 months at Fort Devon, Massachusetts, and Ayer, Massachusetts, which is about 40 miles west of Boston.
I went into the military myself in 1961.
This was
U.S. Air Force.
That's right. Well, I was in the Army.
Yeah.
In the Army. And
were you enlisted guy, or we got a commission?
No. I started out as a private. I got to PFC, and I wound up, as a Spec 5. In the Army Security Agency, because I had to know Morse code, I was a specialist.
Okay.
So I became Spec 5. Now, I'm not really sure what that is.
I'm not either. I never heard it before.
But maybe it was a corporal, but I wasn't a sergeant.
Yeah,
I didn't
I
go private.
I know what
sergeant.
rank you were.
Yeah.
You were either E4 or E5.
Yeah, that's it. That's E5.
E5, okay.
E5.
I ended up as an E5 too when I got out, fine, after 6 years.
That's right.
Anyway, so now back to Delano. And at this point, you are not a Christian. You're not going to church at all.
Correct.
Was Delana?
No.
No. Okay.
She didn't.
So what year did you get married?
We were married in February of 1962. And I was back. It's kind of interesting because, as I was mentioning, the Lord, pursued, Delana on my behalf. We had the exchange dinner, and then she went, and that was in October of 1958. She went to San Jose State in September of 1959. And we did not communicate at all. And again, in February of 1960, I was walking into Founders Hall. Founders Hall at that time, it may still be a notable edifice on the USC campus. I was walking into, and they had classes there. I was walking into Founders Hall for a class. Guess who happened to also be at that exact time walking into Founders Hall? We hadn't communicated,
Now, neither one of you are Christians.
Correct.
And you're saying that the Lord
Precisely.
Scripted this.
Yes. Because we sat there, and then I went into the Army in July of 1960. So here again, going into Founders Hall in February of 1960. In July, I went into the Army. Well, I was in the Army for 6 months. No communication whatsoever. So when we came back, the Lord happened to sit there and make sure that I saw Delana again in January of 1961. I went into the Army in July of 1960, got out, in early January of 1961, saw Delana again, and she then in February went to New York City and was there for 7 months. Well, here again, this is the Lord in my life. He brought her back. She was in New York City. Her parents lived in New York City, and she went to work for CBS, Columbia Broadcasting System. And the Lord brought her back in September of 1961 for 2 reasons. Number one, so I had a phone number. I didn't have a phone number for her at any of the other times that he was pursuing her. I wasn't pursuing her. I didn't even have a phone number. Number one, I got a phone number from her. And number two, I was recalled by JFK for the Berlin crisis. So there I was back in Massachusetts. I saw her, got her number and her phone number in September, and I was back in Massachusetts later on in September. But the difference is I drove a car back at that time. The first time when I was in the Army for 6 months, I flew back. This time I took the car back. And here again, the Lord in my life. I had that car. I don't know if you've had the privilege of living in a barracks at Fort Devon, Massachusetts.
I've lived in a barracks.
Heated by a furnace that was run by coal, C-O-A-L. So every morning you wake up, with 1.5 foot of coal dust. Well, maybe not quite 1.5 foot, but coal dust everywhere. And it was, so here I was, November, in a phone booth in Air, Massachusetts, standing on an iceberg, calling Los Angeles. And guess who happened to be at home? This was on a Saturday afternoon in Los Angeles, California. Guess who happened to be at home at that time and said hello? And I'm not exactly sure what I said to her, but I think it was somewhere along the line, you've got to come out and save this poor, suffering soldier. And Delana and I were not boyfriend, girlfriend. We were not penned. We were not engaged. We had not ever even talked about marriage. But when I asked her to come out to Massachusetts without a second's hesitation, she said yes.
Wow.
So proposed to her over the phone immediately. We'd never even talked about it. She said yes. But I had that car, so I was able to pick her up at Boston Logan Airport in December, just a little bit before Christmas. But in the meantime, I was able to find a church. I sat there, and you played the Army for 5 days a week.
Now, you're not a Christian now.
No, not a Christian.
And Delana's not a Christian.
Exactly right. And so we sat there, you played the Army for 5 days a week, but you were off on the weekends. It's just that you had to be back on base. Unless you had leave, you had to be back on base every night. So on Saturdays and Sundays, here again, I wasn't a Christian, Saturdays and Sundays, I drove Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut looking for a church.
Now, what were you looking for a church for?
Because I'd asked Delana to marry me.
Oh, you wanted to get married?
Yeah. I said, come back, to Massachusetts, and save this poor suffering soldier. And so she said, yeah, I'll come back. So I sat there, I said, great. So I went looking for a church. Well, I found in Madison, Connecticut, southern Connecticut on Long Island Sound, I found the first Congregational Church in Madison, Connecticut. White clapboard, enormous New England steeple. That church was 200 years old. That had been built in the 1770s. The pews are still the same height, but you had a door on the pew.
Yes, I'm familiar with that, yeah.
And the pulpit was bolted against the front wall. The pastor had to walk up a stairway to get into the pulpit. Franklin Bauer, and I said to him, Pastor Bauer, will you be available on February 3rd? And I do not remember how Delana and I set February 3rd, as the wedding date, but we did. And of course, the Lord in my life, what was Reverend Bauer's answer? Of course. So my next question was, any idea where I can have a wedding reception? He said, go see Rosie. So there in Madison, Connecticut, I went in to see Rosie's Woodlawn. And I said to Rosie, are you available on February 3rd? Well, of course, what is her answer? If the Lord's in your life, the answer is yes. So I had a church, I had a wedding reception. So the only thing I needed then was a honeymoon. Where were we going to have a honeymoon? Well, we'd known about Vermont. Vermont was very nice and so forth. But there again, there's the Lord in my life. Where did I get the phone number for the tourist bureau in Vermont? I don't know, but there I was in that same phone booth on that same iceberg, calling Vermont. And I asked the woman that answered, I said, you have a recommendation, for a place for a honeymoon? And she said, the Chalet Waldwinkel. And after we hung up, I thought to myself, Waldwinkel? No combat soldier's going to stay in a place called Waldwinkel. Well, as you know, in New England. There's 150 states, they're within a shorter distance than it is from here to Lodi. So I drove up there. I had the car. This was, again, the Lord. I was only, I had the car, so I drove up, to see Charlie Wald. The name of the street was Waldwinkle. It's one of these iconic New England bed and breakfast places. Perfect. So there it was. I had the church, the wedding reception place, and the place for a honeymoon. And this again, Delana was in Los Angeles. I did all of this. She wasn't anywhere. So I picked her up then in December.
Now, where's her parents at?
Her parents then were in New York City. Her dad worked for Federal Mogul, which makes ball bearings. But he was one of these guys, talented guy like my dad. They needed him on Long Island, for something. So they moved him from Los Angeles to New York City. Well, that's what was interesting. I picked Delana up at the airport about December 23rd, something like that. In the early afternoon, drove her from the airport to the train station. I had to be back on post that night. Where was Delana going to stay? Well, her parents were in New York City. I put her on the train in Boston, Massachusetts, and she took the train down to New York City to be with her folks. I saw her maybe, 2 hours, 3 hours? Ah.
So, Ray, so you got married.
Yep.
And where did you, we've only got a couple minutes here on this program. We're going to look at, we haven't even got to how you became a Christian yet, but we'll do that in the next program.
Okay.
Next program.
Right.
So you guys got married.
Yep.
And you were living where?
Well, we were living on post.
Okay, you're living on the post.
Well,
okay.
I'm sorry, no, we were living just off the back gate.
I know.
We had an apartment.
Of course, I could.
But
yeah. Typical.
But think about that. I picked her up at Boston, about the 23rd of December. We were married on February 3rd. That meant that she and her mom had just a little over a month to put together a wedding. Invitations, wedding dress, all that stuff. But it was done. We were married in Madison, Connecticut. And that was in February of 1962. I was released, from active duty from the recall in August. So we were still at Fort Devon from February of 1962 to August of 1962. And of course I had the car. We drove back.
Right, okay.
To Los Angeles.
So, wow, Ray, well, this is an interesting story. We're going to have to pick it up here. We got 56 seconds left on this program. But so next week we're going to look at your early family life and then how you became a Christian.
Okay.
And then what happened after that.
Yep.
And so on and so forth.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Delana's, untimely death.
And her untimely death.
Yep.
And you were married for how many years?
59 and a half years.
59 and a half years.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember Delana well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my.
Yep. And the closing months of her life and so on was there many times.
Yep. Indeed.
And well, Ray, we're gonna have to say goodbye here, and we'll be looking for the next program of Why I Am a Christian. Next program. So long.